So, welcome everyone. I want to start by thanking you all for attending this webinar introducing this new standard. The committee and I are very excited for this publication, and we hope that it's very useful to many. I do want to begin today by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet on a virtual platform, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we all call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. Before we talk about the standard today, I'd like to do a little simulation exercise just to set the stage a little bit. So I want everyone here today to maybe think of a place in your own home that brings you comfort. Maybe it's your kitchen, maybe it's your favorite chair, your garden, or even your family photos. Now imagine trying to stay connected to that place while living with dementia. Home isn't simply where the care happens. Home is where our identity lives. And for many of us, home is where we feel the most independent. It's where our routines, memories, and sense of self are rooted. For people living with dementia, preserving that connection can be just as important as the care itself. To further get this point across, an interesting statistic cited that nearly all Canadians, about 96%, say that aging in place helps enable the preservation of independence and dignity. And so, with that being said, CSA Z2000 exists to help organizations make this goal much more achievable. Now, here is some interesting context. Every hour, 9 people in Canada are diagnosed with dementia. And this diagnosis can change many lives. It changes the lives of the actual individual diagnosed, the family, the care partner, the care team. And so when we talk about dementia, we often do start with numbers. But behind every statistic is someone trying to preserve something incredibly important to them, which is their independence, their dignity, and the life that they have built. Now, what if the quality of dementia care didn't depend on where you lived or on who was providing it? And that's why CSA 2000 was developed. It was developed to help this challenge with the hopes that no matter where you are receiving care from, patients, families, workers, they can all feel reassurance that they will receive the same quality of dementia care if they are adopting the standard. So why are we talking about dementia now, and why was this standard created now? Well, there's over 770,000 Canadians living with dementia. As we know, 9 are diagnosed per hour. There is a $16.6 billion projected cost to come for dementia care by 2031, and Canadians will have more than 1 million care partners supporting people living with dementia by 2050. Now, what would dementia-inclusive care look like if every Canadian could experience it? It would mean independence, dignity, and consistency. These statistics point to something much bigger than increasing demand. We know that Canadians overwhelmingly want to remain in their homes and communities for as long as possible, but that requires more than goodwill. It requires consistency, which is exactly why standards matter. Let's take a group of people driving to work, for instance. Everyone wants to reach the same destination. But imagine everyone was driving using different road signs. Maybe some stop signs were triangles. Some speed limits were optional. Some roads might have used kilometers, others used miles. The destination doesn't change, but getting there can become confusing and potentially unsafe. Healthcare is no different. Every organization wants quality dementia care, but without shared guidance, everyone takes slightly different routes. So CSA standards don't replace professional judgment, but they provide a common language for all of us to use. Now that I've set the stage a little bit, I'd like to get into who CSA is and what the standard really covers. The mission of CSA Group's standard organization is to enhance the lives of Canadians through the advancement of standards in the public and private sectors. Behind many things Canadians trust every day are standards they never think about. For over 100 years, CSA Group has worked with experts across Canada to develop consensus-based standards that improve safety, quality, and trust. Standards are developed by expert members through a consensus-based, transparent, and accredited process. We have 14 areas of focus, over 11,000 dedicated volunteer members, 3,000 standards, and over 1,000 committees. One of the things that makes standards unique is that no single organization writes them. Being built through consensus means bringing together people with different expertise, different perspectives, and sometimes very different opinions, all to provide that guidance that reflects collective knowledge rather than a single viewpoint. So what really is the problem that we are trying to solve? We know that excellent work is happening across Canada, but it happens in silos. Therefore, our approaches may vary, and there's no national framework for how dementia care should be carried out. And therefore, people experience care very differently. So, Dementia Inclusive Home and Community Care, our new standard, provides consistent evidence-informed guidance to help address some of those gaps. As mentioned before, our standards are developed by committee experts, some of which you will meet in our panel today. But these include directors, researchers, policymakers, and government representatives, some operational leaders, PSWs, and even caregivers. All these different voices and opinions came together to work on this important initiative and write the standard together. But to also enhance its development, we consulted with an advisory group of people living with dementia, as we wanted to ensure that they were not an afterthought and that their voices helped shape this guidance. We then shared it with the general public for 60 days for them to review and provide feedback. After reviewing the feedback and incorporating it, the committee reached consensus and the standard was ready for publication. Now, who is this standard intended for? The standard is really designed for the organizations delivering care on the ground. That includes both private home care providers and government-funded organizations. But importantly, it also considers the broader circle, clients themselves, care partners, and other service providers who are all a part of the care experience. Now, the reason the standard is needed comes down to a couple of key challenges. First, as mentioned before, there's currently a lack of standardized national guidance on what dementia-inclusive care actually looks like in home and community settings. Organizations are often doing their best, but without a shared framework, approaches can be inconsistent. Second, there's a real need for better training and support for the workforce. Care partners are navigating very complex situations, and they need practical, evidence-informed guidance that they can apply in real time. And that's where the standard comes in. CSA Z2000 is designed to provide tools and frameworks to help address these gaps, creating more consistency in care, supporting the workforce, and ultimately improving outcomes for people living with dementia and those who support them. They help create that shared understanding of quality and safety, especially in settings that are more decentralized, like someone's home. The standard was also created with policymakers and educators in mind, being aligned with the Canadian Dementia Strategy, The hope is that these oversight bodies realize the value of this document and it becomes a norm in organizations rather than voluntary to follow. This standard also includes recommendations that help support the quality of life for persons living with dementia and their care partners. There is specific attention to responsibilities of home and community care organizations, and that is why we provide guidance for organizational accountability. We wanted to keep in mind the health and safety of persons living with dementia, care partners, and personnel, and the complex decisions they make on a day-to-day basis. And that is why there is evidence-informed frameworks within this document. Workforce support can also be a challenge for some, and so there is guidance on training and education for care partners, as well as care personnel, and what to do for emergency preparedness if you ever come to those situations. We also wanted to provide measures to support person-centered care, equal access to care, and respecting the privacy and dignity for all persons living with dementia. And so the standard is really created with person-centered care planning at the forefront. Now, the standard does begin with some background and common definitions that will be useful to refer to as you read through the document. But within the standard itself, there are three main clauses I'd like to bring our attention to. The first is Clause 4, which works on organizational purpose and objectives. This clause provides specific guidance on how organizations can set themselves up to be dementia inclusive. For example, we talk about autonomy and self-determination, which really focuses on respecting each person's right to make decisions about their own life, including choices that carry risk. We provide guidance on how to support personal agency, reinforcing a sense of control and independence, and we foster empowerment, allowing individuals to participate meaningfully in their care and daily routines. This clause also talks about communication and the importance of shared decision making. The standard mentions the importance of facilitating open dialogue between persons, care partners, and care teams about risks, choices, and desired outcomes. The standard includes language that empower the persons to express their own wishes, whether verbal or nonverbal, to inform and guide the decisions made about their care. It also provides guidance on how to build trust and mutual understanding, ensuring that the decisions are informed and collaborative, and keeping the person's voice central in all matters affecting their care and ultimately their life. We also have Clause 5, which is organizational structures and resources for providing care. This clause really talks about staff planning, staff competencies, staff retention, and communications. When we talk about communications, we talk about information transfer between internal and external organizations. We talk about how to foster effective communication with persons living with dementia and their care partners. Talk about how to respect equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as respecting cultural safety and humility of those that we are working and collaborating with. The last big clause is Clause 6, which is assessment, care planning, and service delivery. This clause really goes into supporting persons living with dementia and their care partners as integral members of healthcare delivery. There is a large proponent that deals with respect for values and preferences. This is to ensure that plans of care are tailored to honor individual beliefs, priorities, and cultural backgrounds. It promotes dignity by validating each person's unique life story and wishes, and enhances satisfaction with care and overall well-being. Another section within this clause provides guidance on how to preserve identity and self-worth, providing further guidance on how to support the maintenance of self-esteem, a positive view of self, even in the face of age-related challenges. It recognizes that dignity is deeply tied to feeling valued, heard, and respected, and provides steps on how organizations can make this part of their daily operations within their own organization. Finally, there are two appendices within the standard. Appendix A explains the concept of dignity of risk, which is a term that clients have a right to risk and must be balanced to preserve dignity. The final appendix is about environmental modifications for the home that can be supportive for a person living with dementia. We also included a section at the beginning of the standard called Guiding Principles, which the whole standard philosophy is rooted in, and are all topics I've been alluding to throughout this presentation. Now, I'd like everyone to take a look and notice something interesting about these guiding principles. None of them start with policy. They all start with the people at the forefront of their concepts. You'll see things like person-centered care at the center, along with principles like human rights, cultural awareness, safety and dignity. There's also a strong emphasis on care partner engagement, workforce training, and continuous quality improvement. What's important here is that this isn't about adding more complexity to care or to daily operations. It's about creating alignment, giving all these organizations a shared foundation to work from. From an organizational perspective, the standard helps translate all these principles here on this page into action. That includes things like tailoring existing policies and procedures so they better support individuals living with dementia, strengthening decision-making processes, especially in situations that are complex or evolving, ensuring preparedness, whether that's for emergencies or for broader system disruptions. So really, it's not about starting from scratch, but it's about building on what organizations already have within their systems and doing it in a more structured, consistent way. And importantly, this isn't just for frontline teams. This standard can be applied across multiple levels, whether it's CEOs that are setting the direction, directors overseeing implementation, or policymakers shaping the broader system. Standards like CSA Z2000 help create that bridge, connecting high-level strategy with what actually happens on the ground. In conclusion, this standard is built to support the growing dementia population in their homes and community. Dementia care, we know, is about preserving dignity, not just about managing a diagnosis. Canadians overwhelmingly want to age in place, but organizations need consistent guidance to make that possible. A standard provides the framework, and real change can happen through standard implementation. So no standard really succeeds on paper alone. If we have people living with dementia and their caregivers, the working force, and decision makers writing these documents, and knowing that that's what it's grounded in, it can provide reassurance. Imagine you are receiving home care for the first time. It's scary, you don't really know what to expect with all the changes, and you don't know if the workers will support you or what the organization that you are receiving care might be like. If clients know that guidelines were made by others in similar circumstances and with people like them in mind, they may have more trust in its validity, knowing that that's what it's rooted in. And ultimately, the whole experience might not be so scary, and isn't that really the ultimate goal we're trying to achieve here? Knowing that your mom, your dad, your grandparents, or whoever your loved one is safely taken care of and feels happy. If we want that gold standard nationally, we need organizations and people using the standard and implementing it. We've done all the work, and now it's up to people like you here today to use this document. In order to bring real change to this sector, we require community movement for people to start using and advocating for this standard and others that are like it. So policymakers and government bodies can see the impact it makes and provide better outcomes nationally for those receiving dementia care. And that is why our conversation today is so important. And it brings me to the next portion of the webinar, which is our panel discussion. So today we'll hear from perspectives across Canada that include government, provider organizations, health system leadership, research, and lived experience. On our panel today, we have Jayon Jones, who is the Regional Director for Quality, Education, and Research in Long-Term Care and Assisted Living at Island Health. We have Jim Mann, who is a researcher with lived experience. We have Heidi Crocher, who is the Senior Manager of Strategic Operations and Home Care with the Yukon Government. And we have Miranda Romanovich, who is the Regional Director and CEO for the Canadian Support Workers Association. Today, we will try our best to answer all questions, and we hope that you find the conversation insightful, as we will cover opportunities, challenges, lived experience, and implementation. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome the panelists to turn on the camera, and we will begin. Great, wonderful. So thank you all for our panelists for joining us here today. It's really great to have such a diverse range of experience in this room. It's really hard to get that, so we appreciate all the efforts. I think we lost Jim. Jim, are you there? There he is, perfect. All right, so I would like to take a few minutes for everyone to introduce themselves. As you're introducing yourselves, you could tell us a bit about your role, what brought you to this work, and maybe one thing about yourself that we wouldn't find on your LinkedIn profile. Heidi, let's start with you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Heidi Croucher, and I'm a senior manager with the Yukon Home Care Program, and I'm an occupational therapist. I've been with CSA since October 2022, and I'm joining you today from Whitehorse, Yukon, on the traditional territories of the Kwanlin First Nation and the Tonquetchin Council. I think what brought me to this work has been a combination of my professional experiences and personal values. Over the last 20 years, I've had the privilege of working in a variety of rural, remote, and northern communities across Canada as an occupational therapist. And I've been able to see firsthand the importance of person-centered home and community-based care. Now that I've transitioned to a leadership role, I'm passionate about health equity and helping create systems that enable people, including those living with dementia, to remain connected to their homes, cultures, and communities. One thing that you won't find on my LinkedIn profile is outside of healthcare, I'm really passionate about agriculture and horses, and I'm one of the leaders of the only 4-H horse club in the Yukon.
That is really neat. Got to take some tips from you. Jayon, why don't we go to you next?
Thanks, Neha. Hello, everyone. My name is Jayon Jones. I am a regional director at Island Health, responsible for long-term care and assisted living. My portfolio is quite vast. It covers quality, clinical practice and education, and research for this program for all 60 care homes on the islands. Why did I actually get involved? Well, it all started back, just like with Heidi, back in 2022, just post-pandemic, with the learnings and the spotlight on long-term care. I got involved in CSA group and developing the first standard on operations and infection prevention and control in long-term care, moved on to supporting mental health and well-being in long-term care and assisted living. And then when there was a call out to support dementia inclusive home and community care, well, of course, I was going to put my hand up, because we are in the business of providing dementia inclusive care in this health sector. And it's an important sector because it's really about supporting dignity and respect for those who live with dementia, no matter how old you are, whether you're older or if you're younger. Yeah, it's really important to me. I have a passion for it professionally and personally as well. What you can't find on LinkedIn is the fact that I started watching Korean dramas, K-dramas, before they became widely popular on streaming platforms, just to keep up my Korean. I do speak Korean with my parents, and now I have so many to watch, I can't even keep up.
Yeah, they are quite lengthy, but they're so good. And something for the audience as well, Heidi and Jayon were very big contributors to the standard as well, so we are very happy to have them here today. Jim, why don't we go to you?
Sure, thank you. My name is Jim Mann, and I live in the Vancouver area. I have Alzheimer's disease, which is the foundation of what I do. I advocate to educate, which is why I'm honored to be on this panel today. one thing you won't find on LinkedIn is, as I told my goddaughter not that long ago, I am living my best life. Having moved from corporate work to being a researcher and author and speaker in the pursuit of a reduction of stigma of living with dementia and the promotion of meaningful engagement of people living with dementia. So I thank you for the invitation to be here.
Thanks, Jim. We love that you're living your best life. And finally, Miranda.
Thanks so much for having me. My name is Miranda Romanovich. I'm the CEO of the Canadian Support Workers Association and also the Ontario Personal Support Workers Association. And I'm a PSW of 20 years. I worked in long-term care, home care, hospital settings, and private care as a PSW. And what brought us to this was, of course, support workers are first and foremost the first on the scene in many cases with individuals that are, that have dementia or Alzheimer's, and many times we are the last to leave. And so, this is an important voice to bring to the table in response to what is needed in order to create a better system for all across Canada. And, CSA, we've worked with you guys many times, and we actually helped bring a lot of support workers to the table for conversation and information. So we're proud of that as well. And what is not on my LinkedIn is I actually own a center in Cambridge, Ontario for individuals with developmental and disabilities and autism. And it is PSW led, and it's the only second one in Ontario to ever happen. So I'm very proud of that. Don't talk about it often, but I'm very proud of it.
Wow, Miranda, that's incredible. You should definitely talk about it often. You definitely have really been in the thick of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's wonderful. It's lovely to be with you all, and I hope our audience feels a bit more comfortable with our panelists today. So with that, we do have a couple questions that we'll be asking our panelists today. At the end, we will be reserving some time for some audience Q&A as well. So hopefully we are able to get through all those questions as well. But without further ado, we'll get started. So the first question I have for all of you today is, what does the phrase dementia inclusive care mean to you? And are there any misconceptions you believe people still have about dementia? So Jim, let's start with you.
Sure, thanks. Yes, there are certainly misconceptions. I read a post on LinkedIn this past Friday that addressed this. It noted that behind almost everything we do in aged care, there is a human story. And that's the misconception. I call it implicit bias, that I think is at all levels of care. The idea that the delivery of care does not have to be person-centered or person-focused for a person, a patient, resident, or client living with dementia. As the LinkedIn post noted, a shower is not just a task. A meal is not just nutrition. A conversation is not just filling time, and behavior is very rarely just behavior. A 2025 paper included, our clients will say that we don't talk or smile enough, but it's because we are on a task. I don't want to refer to them as a job, but they are a job, a task at the moment. It just so happens that the task involved a human being. So my hope is CSA Z2000 will go far to change the level of understanding about caring for and working with people living with dementia. The words in the standard give me hope. There are a lot of shall do's versus should do's, which I like, but I think we all know, to be frank, talk is cheap. We cannot lose sight of the fact that home and community care are vital public services. A concern that I have is creating unrealistic expectations in the community of change in care delivery to a more person-focused service.
Thanks, Jim. I couldn't agree with you more. And Miranda, I saw you nodding your head a lot as Jim was speaking. Do you have anything to add?
I think not a lot. I think Jem really nailed it. And I think the others will agree with me. I think the only thing that speaks to me with the phrase of dementia inclusive care is continuity of care.
That's
And that is, you know, one of our biggest issues across Canada in every sector is creating that continuity, ensuring that there is, you know, the support worker, the same support worker, you know, building these dementia teams, ensuring that the training is there. The training is not there. So I think, you know, just that was just all I wanted to add to Jim's thing was that's where my thought process kind of went in relation to that question.
Thanks, Miranda. Heidi, how about you? Do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I think Jim and Miranda both did a wonderful job. I think for me, when I think of dementia inclusive care, looking at our services and ensuring we're recognizing the person first, not the diagnosis, and really looking at with that person then what's meaningful for them to participate in their daily lives. So is it the relationships, what occupations are meaningful to them, and how can we ensure people remain connected to their culture and their communities? And to do that, I think we need to look at how are we adapting our systems, our environments, and our approaches so that clients can successfully navigate challenges that may come their way.
Thanks, Heidi. And Jayon, as you know, in your organization, you're the director, you're implementing quality initiatives. Do you resonate with what some of our panelists are speaking about today? Do you have different viewpoints?
Oh, absolutely. I echo everything that's been said so far. What's integral to this, and I know Miranda can appreciate this, here we call them healthcare aides. They are 80% of our workforce. So it's really important at the bedside that they feel confident and competent in providing care. And you're right, dementia is a disease. It's not a label. It's like any other chronic disease. When you have a diagnosis, you get to know the illness and the trajectory of that illness. And it's important that the workforce do understand the disease progression and not just look at that as a label, but look at the person holistically. They are still that person and provide the care that, with their preferences and their values in mind.
I agree more. Thank you. And that kind of sets us up for my next question, which is, you know, as we've kind of been talking about, publishing a standard is really just one thing, but implementing it is another. So what do organizations really need in order to successfully apply this guidance? So maybe Heidi, let's start with you.
Thank you. Yes, publishing the standard is really the first step in a sense to look at how to successfully implement it. I think within our government system, I think right away we need leadership commitment to understand and appreciate the importance of a standard such as this. Miranda touched on it, looking at workforce education as well. So are we supporting staff with the tools, resources, and education they need? And then I think when we're looking at any policy or program development, we need engagement with people with lived experience of dementia. So how are we incorporating those engagement opportunities in our organization? And I think in home and community care, it's also important to adapt to the local realities, especially in rural and remote and our northern communities. So not just looking at are we compliant with the standard, but looking at how can we create a culture where everyone living with dementia feels supported, respected, and included in every interaction in the healthcare system.
Yeah, that's a really good point, especially about the rural and remote areas too. There's so many different geographies in Canada we have to consider when it comes to care. And you know, I really would like to hear your perspective, Miranda, from a workforce perspective of what kind of challenges might come from an organization if they're applying this guidance.
That's a loaded question. I think, you know, there has to be buy-in and there has to be commitment. Like just to echo what Heidi just said, from leadership. It has to come from the top down. There has to be that commitment and there has to be that opportunity for the, and I'm just going to say, because yeah, you know, HCAs or, you know, PSWs, et cetera, what we're called across Canada, you know, for them to have the time to do the training, for, you know, the training to be either funded or accessible, for it to be something where, you know, that the support worker buys into it as well. One thing that we hear from our membership base all the time is they don't have time to do the training. And when they do want to do the training, they're not either A, being paid for it, or B, it doesn't really talk about dementia, Alzheimer's, etc., in relation to the actual front line. It talks maybe a very kind of broad element, but it doesn't actually talk about what is the duties, what is the etc. of the personal support worker, the support worker, etc., etc. And they really have taken the personal out of that care. And it's very clinical now. And we need to put that personal back in to that care so that the support workers can do their job to the best of their abilities. And the companies, associations, etc., need to support the front line and ensure that they have that ongoing support. So creating dementia teams, let's say, so that continuity is there, that support is there, and that ongoing, ongoing support is there.
Totally. And I like that idea about, designated dementia teams because, it actually is quite needed. And Smayon, I'm curious from a quality standpoint, if you have similar thoughts as well, being in that kind of, I guess, higher level position.
Yeah, so from a quality improvement or continuous quality improvement perspective, when you have a new standard like this, you test the language, you identify the problem, and work on a small pilot project, and then gather the evidence, the data to see if there's a proof of concept that's verified, and then you spread and scale that up. So when I look at this standard, it's also important as healthcare organizations to look at their policies and procedures and see where there's gaps. Because like you said earlier in your presentation, Neha, every healthcare organization and system are doing their best to provide dementia care to the best of their knowledge. And the standard helps provide a more national view on it and how we can work as healthcare organizations, not in silo anymore, but as a group to really focus on dementia and care that's inclusive in home and community settings, and also in long-term care and in hospital settings as well. We are on a care continuum. We all access healthcare in different settings. So it's really important that everybody is dementia aware. Part of my research branch of the work that I do is partnering with academic institutions, and they're also focused on dementia inclusive communities as well, and partnering with businesses. So they're also aware of recognizing people who live with dementia. So it's like having a bigger, broader society on dementia awareness.
Yeah, it's also important. And dementia inclusive communities is also something I've been seeing that's becoming more buzz, inside the home, but also individuals need to live. As Jim said, you got to live your best life. So what can we do outside of the home as well? Thanks. And Jim, do you have anything to add to that?
I do. And I guess being a bit more specific than Miranda and Heidi, the support and encouragement of their entire team is important. But from the board of directors, the CEO, and all the staff, the board is concerned about the organization's bottom line. So the board members will need to understand and appreciate why CSA Z2000's implementation is important and why their support of the standard, as well as their support of the CEO, will be necessary. There has to be passion and consistency and the will to implement the standard for the benefit of clients and their staff, because it will take time, money, and effort. The organization will want to have the belief that the support is also there from the wider community, i.e. families and friends. When you think of, for example, the standard suggesting the idea that some level of risk is acceptable will be a learning opportunity for everyone. And I mean, some families will have to be convinced of that. And of course, Item number 4 is funding. The board, everybody will have to really consider that big issue. So,
Yeah, no, very well said, Jim. And I think we can all agree that it takes lots of moving parts to get something like this implemented, but all the work is definitely worth it. And I do have some, specific questions based to your role, your organization. So maybe Jim, I'll start with you. So as someone bringing both lived experience and research perspectives related to dementia, what are some of the challenges people living with dementia and their care partners continue to face in the home or community settings that you might feel are not always recognized?
I, I'm going to sort of repeat what was said earlier, but and some is not necessarily a case of not always recognized, but like the need for a better educated workforce. Um, is it recognized by a lot of people? It's less recognized, but there is the need for that understanding of dementia from a person-centered perspective and not an academic or a medical perspective. I consider this a necessity. And think about this. A number of years ago, when our transit system was on strike, we learned that approximately 40% of home care workers arrived at clients' residences by public transit. So if a care provider misses a bus, I can see them arriving late and stressed at the client's home, leaving less time for the personal care. Such a scenario suggests a responsive behavior is inevitable because the care provider is behind and stressed, which transfers to the client. Negative outcomes are inevitable if the care provider is not well informed on delivering care to people living with dementia. But the other is absence of continuity of care. The person delivering the care differs from morning to night and every day. And often that care provider does not know the client is a person living with dementia. For people living with dementia, this can be especially challenging because they rely on routine, familiarity, and caregivers who understand their needs. Putting all this together highlights the questionable reliability of services being delivered, which is personally really concerning. And while I have the floor, if you will, I would like to highlight one more issue that may not apply to every province across the country, but is nevertheless a question of accessibility and inequity. And in BC, many older adults must pay large co-payments for publicly funded home support. And I'm confident in saying that this can be a significant barrier to accessing the home care and support services that are needed. And aging in place, as was said earlier, may be the preferred option for many people, but our co-payment requirement penalizes seniors, with many ending up in emergency or entering long-term care. Sorry I took so long.
No, not at all, Jim. Those were all insights we needed to hear, and I'm sure our attendees here today want to continue hearing your insights. And Miranda, I saw you nodding a lot again, and I know that you deal with the personal support worker workforce. Are you seeing similar challenges in your role and as you interact with the PSW workforce?
We see it on the daily. I mean, I applaud you, Jim, for saying what you said, because it hit the nail right on the head. It's what the support workers on the front line have been screaming about for quite a long time, that, the continuity of care, like I said earlier, is not there. I think that, I know that, not I think, I know that if the PSWs or the support workers or HCAs were able to have that continuity with those clients, understand dementia better, putting that personal back into dementia care, that we would see a brighter tomorrow a better aging in place, shall I say. Like Jim talks about, 40% of, the PSWs, they take transit. That's very true, even in Ontario, within, the major GTA. And yeah, they show up, they're angry, they're frustrated, they don't have time to read the care plan, they don't know what's going on. This is where that real important piece of building dementia support teams within the home and community care sector would literally change how dementia care is performed, and it would give a voice to the clients who still have a voice, to be able to create a better environment moving forward. Right now, Jim was right. A lot of these support workers have no idea that they're going into homes with individuals who have dementia or have Alzheimer's. They're not given time to read a care plan, or they're not given that information. A lot of times we're just given, male, 87 years old, requires some ADLs. That's all we get. We don't get anything else. So something needs to change in response to, everywhere. We could go on about that, but especially in relation to dementia care, because we don't have the space, we don't have the rooms. These people don't want to wind up in our long-term care facilities, in the hospital. We have the ability to keep these people at home, aging in place healthily, if we can just get those dementia teams in place, the continuity of care in place. And with this national standard, I really believe that it will protect families and help navigate Canada's, care economy, in ensuring that their loved ones are taken care of properly. I think that's what it's all about.
Definitely. And I see some clapping hands, some people are really resonating with that. And, I couldn't agree more. Okay, I'll move on to my next question, and that's for Heidi. So Heidi, from a government perspective, can you comment on how a national framework like this can be impactful? And how can standards like this remain flexible enough to be applied in diverse communities, as you mentioned before, from urban to remote settings?
It's a great question. And I think to build on what Jim just mentioned, recognizing that across Canada, our jurisdictions vary so much, even within a province or territory. If we look at different jurisdictions having different legislation, different models of service, resources, we really see that vary by community and individual population needs overall as well. So I think from a government perspective, this is precisely why we need a standard like this and how it can be so impactful. I think it really gives each organization an evidence-informed framework and a shared set of expectations. That's going to help us guide how we're getting to the same destination. So this framework can help guide our policy development, how we're planning to expand systems and services, looking at our ongoing quality improvement initiatives, and looking at how are we delivering services across different jurisdictions, even within the same province or territory, when we're looking at health equity. And again, the standard isn't going to eliminate our regional differences, and we wouldn't want that to happen, but it's going to help create a common language for us all to use, and also that common vision nationally of what an ideal, high quality, dementia inclusive home and community care service can look like. I believe it's going to help us align our efforts across different organizations and sectors when you look at who you're working with, your internal and external partners, when you're looking at services for a community. And then hopefully really supporting greater consistency and outcomes for people living with dementia and their care partners. I know my other panelists have also spoken a lot about the continuity of care, and looking at a framework like this can really help us look at how services being delivered across the different points of contact you may have in your health system journey. And I think one of the strengths of the standard is that it focuses on principal outcomes and it's not prescribing a single approach. And I think that's really valuable. And that's really how it can be adapted to different parts of our country and different organizations. And the flexibility is so important. Again, I'm speaking from a rural, remote, northern perspective, but when we look at how those local realities can be so different than a larger urban center when we're looking at access to resources. A Yukon example might be that we often need to adapt services to geography, workforce availability. It's challenging to recruit in some of our smaller rural communities. We have travel challenges, cultural considerations, and really wanting to look what are the strengths of individual communities and how can a standard like this enhance inclusive services from a community perspective. And again, I think one of the great things about this standard is that it is a strategy we can use to advance equity without requiring uniformity, which I think is so important for individual communities. So I'm hoping that it's going to help ensure, regardless of where you live, the goal remains the same. We want to create environments and systems where people living with dementia can continue to participate, belong, and live well in their communities, because we know people want to stay at home in their communities. And I think it also is exciting because it's creating opportunities for jurisdictions to learn from each other, to share promising practices, and while still respecting local cultures, organizational priorities, and our differing systems.
Wow, thank you, Heidi. I do really like that. You said advancing equity without uniformity. And that's sometimes hard, but that's a great way to, kind of summarize what standards do in general. All right, so my next question is for Jayon. So you were very much involved in developing this standard. So throughout that process, what conversations or debates were key in shaping its final content? And is there any specific section you'd like to highlight for organizations working with home care?
That is a really loaded question, as Miranda had put it earlier. Yes, that's a great question. I had to put some thought into that question. But before I start, Miranda, I forgot to say that in home and community care in BC, we call them community health workers. So forgive me for those who are joining the webinar. We have CHWs and HCAs who provide that bedside care for clients and residents. I'm just so impressed with our panelists and their answers and their reflections on the questions so far. It's so important and key for us to really work on this as a national, not a call to action, but an awareness of the fact that dementia is inevitable, and the numbers are telling us that we're going to have a growing population of people who live with dementia. So one thing that was a really big topic of discussion was respecting autonomy of person. Because when you go into a congregate living setting in long-term care, we do our best to provide person-centered care, but you're also in a congregate living setting with other people who may not live with dementia, but they need 24/7 nursing care. So that was a big discussion with our technical subcommittee about how do we balance safety with the dignity of risk to provide autonomy, self-determination, to really uphold their values and preferences, not just for the person living with dementia, but also their care partner as well. How do we support both people within the household to ensure that everybody can feel like they have a good experience with the care service, good quality of life, feel connected to their community and their families? So that was a big discussion, and we had specific language centered around that in the standard and an annex on a whole section on dignity of risk and what that means. So that was an important feature in the development of this standard. And if I was to think of what would be the most important clause to really focus on for me, was just clause 6 about care planning, assessments, and service delivery. As our other distinguished panelists have voiced on, is the implementation and supporting the personnel. The people who go and provide that care, they also need to feel good about providing that care and feel comfortable with providing care as well, and building relationship and trust with the person who lives with dementia and their care partner as well. and supporting what they need in the moment. And it changes from day to night to the next week. It's so important. And we really want to make sure that both the person living with dementia and the care partner are receiving education and training as well on the disease itself, what to expect, system navigation. We even included medication management so they could understand what the impact is for certain medications, what to look for. So it's really important to center on the person who is receiving that care and the person who is providing that informal care at home as well.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you, Jayon. I can attest to that as I was listening to the committee, decide what needs to go into the standard and everything. Autonomy was a huge topic. And even me, myself, I learned a lot about dignity of risk and some terms I never would have even thought of. So, that just brings me to another point that awareness is so important. And, I'm glad that we had such a robust level of experience and awareness on the committee to even bring up these topics.
Can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I didn't really explain what my clinical background is. My background is medical laboratory science. So it's behind the scenes, helping diagnose disease processes. So not a lot of frontline patients connection, except for when I worked shifts. When I went into long-term care 9 years ago, I didn't know what I was getting into, and I knew I wanted to provide dignity and respect for those people who live in their last phase of life in long-term care. And dementia, when I hear dementia before I went into long-term care, it was just a term for people who got old, they just got dementia. Well, dementia is an umbrella term with over 100 different types. And I have learned so much in my 9-year journey working in the sector. And what was important for me in the standard was to really build that confidence and competence of the workforce for people to really understand what dementia is and the different kinds of dementia, and to see that, and Jim explained that before, a behavior isn't just a behavior, it's about unmet needs. What is the root cause of that behavior? Why are they doing that? What is it about how I'm approaching that person is making them respond to the situation? We all do it. We respond with fear, anger, frustration, sadness when we can't express our feelings and our wants and needs. And that's the same with someone who lives with dementia. So that's why I'm so passionate about this standard and why I'm so involved and invested in the work that we do. Thanks.
Thank you, Jayon. I mean, without people with passion like you and everyone else here today, this work wouldn't be possible. So it's all great efforts. And then Miranda, our last targeted question for you. And it's been kind of spoken about throughout today's panel session, but PSWs or healthcare aides or whatever, the term might be, which province you reside in, they're the ones spending 99% of the time with clients. So, if the standard is implemented effectively, do you feel there is going to be an impact on, their day-to-day operations as a PSW working with a client? What kind of impact do you see, changing as they're visiting their clients?
I would say more confidence, better care, more passion, as Jim put it, in what they are doing and how they're conducting themselves. Like I said earlier, I mean, the majority of us, when we get into becoming support workers, we're in it because we want to help make a difference, and we're there to help where others cannot. And so, not giving us the tools to do our job to the best of our abilities is really, it really hinders how we perform our care. And then again, who suffers in the end but the client. So I really believe that this standard is something that, if implemented across Canada, or even just with organizations or governments, I mean, and I pray that it is implemented, because what I see in my head in a perfect world is, like I said earlier, dementia care teams, ongoing education that is centered more towards what the support worker does, as opposed to a broad overlook of dementia and Alzheimer's, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And them being involved as an actual part of the interdisciplinary health team when it comes to the building of these care plans, the care, or the oversight care of these individuals, because many times, you know, a lot of times they're not even involved in building the care plan. All they do is they document, they never have a say in what happens. But becoming a part of that actual team in relation to the care of the individual, I think would be a monumental change, not just for the PSW or the support worker, but also for the client and the client's family. Because then suddenly you have that solid team, that continuity of care, that plan of care moving forward, and the support worker can do their job. I think at the end of the day, it would impact very largely their day-to-day work.
And positively at that too.
Very much so. I think, I mean, like I said, a perfect world, right? Like I wish that was the case, and I hope that it does happen. And you know, to anyone who's watching, do it if you can, because it'd be a wonderful existence. Then they could age at home. Then they could, you know, live out their best years, as Jim said. You know, you're living your best life at home. And not only would it help them, but it would also help the families. So the families could have some peace of mind. And we can't forget about them because they are the sole caregivers, right? So it's, you know, this is a good thing. It'd be really positive.
For sure. And, you know, Miranda, kind of want to jump on that and maybe pose it to the rest of the group. You know, let's say we're 5 years down the line and the standard has been successfully implemented, and you know we're living in that perfect world. What else might you see that's, you know, functionally or visibly different for the patients, for the families, for the people providing support? What is like our ideal goal we see if the standard is really implemented? And I'll open it up to the floor. I know Miranda said a bit of a piece, but if you want to add, go for it, or anyone else.
First of all, I'd break out the champagne, but I think the workplace, whether it's a client's home or maybe, hopefully, a long-term care home, is a happier place. Care providers will be laser focused on clients, but through the care plan that's well done, they will know who the client is. They will have a sense of the background of the client and be able to relate in some ways to the client. There will also be a visible connection between staff and clients, and not just whipping in the door and let's do this. And I suggest that both job and client satisfaction will increase, which would be a flag raising day.
I completely agree. Jayan.
I totally agree with what Jim said. At the bedside locally, I also look at a system, healthcare system point of view, a reduction in alternate level of care patients in acute care, long-term care. Long-term care is a limited resource, so it would be really the more appropriate placements in long-term care, where people don't come into long-term care too early because their caregiver or a care partner has burnt out. One thing we didn't really talk about is the interprofessional team. It's not only the personal support workers, the healthcare aides or CHWs, but it's also the nurses, the primary care provider, allied health. It's that interprofessional team-based kind of care that I see in home and community care settings that would really provide holistic care for the person living with dementia in 5 years' time, is to make that integration with internal and external providers.
I think that's such an important point, right? Like people are coming in and out of the homes, caring for a patient of all sorts of level abilities and different purposes. And, you know, I've even seen it firsthand that, you know, physiotherapists might come in and they know nothing about a client versus, you know, a nurse that might come in, and that leaves the client feeling confused. And, you know, we do really need that continuity. Heidi, do you have anything to add to that?
I think ultimately we would see organizations again designing our services around the needs and strengths of people with dementia rather than expecting individuals to adapt to our systems. That can be very challenging to navigate, even if we look at how you access resources, how you communicate with your care team. And I think it's really important to highlight the care partners as well. I know Miranda just spoke about that, and hopefully that they would feel more supported and recognized as essential partners on our care team. The care partners, I hope, will have better access to information, resources, knowing how to access services, and hopefully they won't feel like they're trying to navigate the journey alone, which sometimes we do hear that from care partners.
No, for sure. Thank you, Heidi. Now, we do have some more questions, but we do have a lot of questions coming into the chat. So I want to reserve a lot of time for that. So maybe we'll skip ahead to our last question and then head over to the audience Q&A. So this will kind of be like a lightning round kind of answer. So very quick. Maybe we'll go Heidi, Jayon, Jim, and then Miranda. So I'd like you to finish this sentence. A truly dementia-inclusive organization is one that, and blank.
I think I was first. Is one that adapts to the needs of people living with dementia rather than expecting people living with dementia to adapt to the organization.
I like it. Jayon.
A truly dementia-inclusive organization is one that places the person living with dementia at the center of the care service delivery, which includes a skilled workforce to adapt, I'm using the same word, Heidi, sorry, to the changing care needs, supporting their care partner, and balancing safety while maintaining autonomy of self of the person who lives with dementia.
Amazing. Jim.
Sees more than the bottom line and recognizes their care providers interact with people who are living with dementia, people who may live alone or with a partner or spouse, and who want or need a conversation, and people who look forward to seeing the care provider's familiar face, and at the most basic level, simply connecting with another person. But I think such an organization will also adapt its business model to the realities of older adults, like having paper documents and not requiring every client to be online.
It's a very real point, especially in today's society with technology and digital and all of that. And last but not least, Miranda.
I don't know how I'm going to build on anything anyone just said because it's all pretty perfect. But I was going to say that they build a team, they build a proper team around the person, not the diagnosis.
And, you know, I think it's very telling that all of our panelists today had very similar answers. It just shows how important this topic is and how really making the client, the person, the center of all the care. And no, they did not talk about their answers beforehand. This was all just everyone coming together. So I think that's really telling on how important this is. Okay, so we're gonna take it over to our audience Q&A. We have a lot of questions coming in. And so our panelists, feel free to just raise your hand and I'll call on you if you'd like to answer it. First one, it says, I'm hearing several terms to use in this space, including dementia inclusive, dementia supportive, and dementia friendly. Does the panel have a preferred term and why? Or is the choice dependent on the situation and purpose? Miranda, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's dependent upon the situation and the individual.
For sure.
I'd agree.
Jayon, you have something to add?
Yes, for the standard, we called it dementia inclusive to not forget people who live with dementia who receive service within the standard. But yes, I agree with the other panelists that it does depend on the situation on using terminology.
Thank you. Okay, our next question. As a health and safety specialist, wondering if the standard recognizes the role of health and safety committees/representatives and connects to other CSA standards affecting worker health and safety. So I believe, Jayon, you might be best equipped to answer this as being on the committee, but I can also jump in if needed.
So clause 5 does talk about personnel safety and making sure that the health and well-being of the worker is also respected and supported, including training. We also focused on what it means by retention as well. As Miranda talked about continuity of care, we know that continuity of care includes a steady and stable workforce. So having retention in the language was also important to support that. And how do we retain? We make sure we give them meaning and purpose too in the work that they're providing. So that all stems from education and training that is robust and they feel comfortable with the work that they're providing.
Definitely. And to add to that last point as well, there are other CSA standards referenced within the document as well as applicable and as it relates to health and safety. Okay, so here's our next question. I've heard it argued that seniors care and perhaps specifically dementia care in community could be considered a major project under the federal government's definition of that idea. Do you see opportunities for individuals, groups, advocacy organizations to use the new standard to develop a proposal that could be considered for a major project funding or support? Also a very loaded question, but very good one. I'll pose it to the group if anybody would like to answer. Miranda, go for it.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. I think it would be. I think something like the standard, taking it, proposing it to the government as a means of a pilot, perhaps, to see if it would increase, care in the community, better care in the community, the continuity of care, the increase of people aging in place. I mean, this standard in itself, I think, could really definitely start the process of a pilot of sorts, a project of sorts, just to and in different areas, to go to what Heidi, because I know Heidi's going to come after that. Not just major big cities and stuff, but also big time in the rural areas. I see this happening and working very much so in the rural areas, but we would have to pilot project it. And that would be something that organizations could definitely put forward to the federal or provincial governments to see if that was something that they would be willing to try.
Thanks, Miranda. Heidi, go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really exciting, and a standard such as this really helps us to focus on community development as a whole, and really appreciating that an dementia inclusive environment in our community isn't just healthcare, it's other areas of our community as well. So how can partnerships form? And I think pilot projects are always an incredible opportunity to see what positive impacts we can make at the local level in your community.
Thank you. And yeah, it's I think it's very interesting too that, rural, remote, we see the same, responses that we would see in urban settings. Everyone's going for the same goal. Jim.
Because of of health and delivery of care is really provincial, my hope would be that the focus would be on every province, because there is an element. I mean, advocacy at any time is a positive undertaking, and so to the federal and the provincial government, fine, advocacy, but there is a real need to really do a lot of advocacy at the provincial level, because this is a big cost factor, and I think we all have to admit that. And so we have to, I think, individually, and however many people are in this meeting, have to really focus on their province and do an element of advocacy, seeking support for this.
No, I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Jim. Okay, we have lots more questions coming in. Our next question. And does the standard address risk that dementia care assessment may focus too heavily on physical care needs while underestimating cognitive and functional support needs, especially when a person may still appear physically capable? I'll read it again.
Yeah.
Does the standard address the risk that dementia care assessment may focus too heavily on physical care needs while underestimating cognitive and functional support needs, especially when a person may still appear physically capable? Jayon.
So when we talk about assessments, it's a holistic assessment, not just the physical care needs, but it's the social, environmental, emotional care needs as well of the person. It's the holistic picture. That's something we focus on in long-term care, and there is language or provision in the standard to really make sure that we do also capture the social and emotional components of someone who lives with dementia and their care partner. It's part of the assessment process.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's read our next question. And I think we might know the answer to this from all of our conversations today, but if there's anything else to elaborate, do we see an opportunity for the standard to be incorporated into or influence existing dementia care education programs or overall national strategies? Jayon, go ahead.
Sorry, I can only speak to my own sphere of influence as a regional director for long-term care and assisted living. What we do is take national standards such as these and look at gaps in our own policies and procedures and fill in those gaps in terms of.
Oh, sorry, Jayon, I think you might have just muted yourself.
Sorry. The reason I think these standards are so cool, it was a pan-Canadian collaborative process with jurisdictional differences. We're not prescriptive in the language and the standards, but it does have a common purpose in how we provide care. Just a clear example for me is in our program, we're looking at education and where we can beef up our education for our workforce when it comes to dementia care, and add in relevant modules or develop education modules to make sure that people who provide care in long-term care feel really confident, competent, and equipped in providing dementia care. The same would apply for home and community care settings as well.
For sure. Heidi.
I agree. I think looking within our organization, and it's really important to hear feedback, whether it's from clients or the care partners or our staff, for areas where they feel further education and support is needed. And the standard does speak to competencies to consider. So I think that will be really helpful when looking at further enhancing education that we're providing to our teams.
Definitely, and Miranda.
I was just going to mention here, I mean, we're the association, so we actually do a lot of professional development for PSWs here in Ontario and across Canada, and we're looking to implement those as obviously, we will be implementing it here, but we're also in the process of creating best practice guidelines here in Ontario for the new regulatory structure, which is the Health and Supportive Care Providers Oversight Authority, HESCAPOA, that is newly put in place here in Ontario. So this would be an interesting to take this standard and look at what we already have here in Ontario and amalgamate the two together to look at the standard, look at the training, and implement something better. I think I see one heck of an opportunity here in Ontario.
Yeah, I agree. There's so much important work happening across, each province. And so, like we talked before, each province is doing such great work, but it's all in their own provinces, right? So, I mean, I think it's great that we have this conversation now to kind of really connect and bridge that gap. One last question from the audience. I'll try to get through more, but just looking at the time here, I think this is a good one though. I've heard that in general, people are trying to move away from the term seniors and move towards older adults due to negative connotations associated to the word. What are the panel's thoughts about this in regards to the terms to use?
I think that older adults becomes more inclusive, and I say that because at one point, 65, you were retired. There was that expectation, or years ago, there was that you shall retire at 65, and that's now gone by the wayside. And because of that, the term senior has really lost its meaning, I think, and older adult becomes a little bit more general, and has, I don't know, more relevance. But sometimes really the words are how you feel. Some people can feel that they're an older adult, when they're 60 or whatever. And so I just think older adult has more understanding to it.
In relation to our terms today, it's more inclusive. And I like, Jim, that you're using, the standard terminology. You're like shall, should, you're incorporating it in there. It's great. All right. Our last question that we'll ask the panel today, and apologies if we couldn't get to everyone's question. There were a lot, and we will try our best to either reach out offline to get your questions answered. The last question I'd like to leave our panelists with today is, if someone attending today only remembers one thing about dementia inclusive care, what would you hope that is? Let's start with Heidi.
One thing, that's challenging to narrow it down to one. I think one thing to remember is, again, dementia inclusive care isn't about changing the person. It's putting the person at the center of care. And it's about changing our systems, environments, and approaches so people can continue to have equitable access to services to remain in their communities.
Thank you. Jayon.
Oh, sorry. One thing. Dementia is a brain disease. It is not a label to place on someone. If I was diagnosed with the disease of a form of dementia, I am still me, a healthcare professional, a wife, a mother, and a K-drama enthusiast.
Can't forget about that.
No.
Jim.
There's a word, I can't come up with it now, but just look at individuals living with dementia as living, breathing individuals living with dementia and look at them as with possibilities and not impossibilities. I think that's just so important.
I like that phrase. Possibilities, not impossibilities. I will remember that. Miranda.
I had to write it down because it popped in my head. But putting the personal back into dementia-centered care.
Couldn't agree more. You know, I feel like I need to do the snapping. I feel like that the nodding isn't enough. Everyone like all snaps around.
Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you everyone today, for taking part, our panelists, taking the time to be a part of this important discussion. For everyone who is here on the call today as well. We appreciate you taking out the time and showing your interest into this. You will be receiving an email next week with the recording, as well as a link that will take you directly to a copy of the standard so you can read it for yourself and really digest the information in there. But we do hope that you found today's session very insightful. We hope it got some thoughts turning and has you thinking about what you might do in your personal day-to-day life or in your professional life. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to the Healthcare and Wellbeing team at CSA. And once again, just thank you all for your tremendous support to this event, and we hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.